The neighborhood on Lancaster Boulevard was quiet that night in early August 2025. Streetlights flickered over parked cars in the apartment complex parking lot, casting long shadows across the pavement. The soft hum of the distant Highway 14 was the only sound breaking the stillness of the desert night. Lancaster, California, sits in the high desert of the Antelope Valley, about 70 miles north of Los Angeles, a working-class community where immigrant families often settle seeking affordable housing and the promise of stability. Inside one small apartment in this quiet complex, however, something terrible was unfolding. A light stayed on long after midnight. Neighbors would later recall faint noises, a thud, maybe a muffled cry, then silence. Hours later, a figure emerged, dragging something heavy into the night. He moved quickly, methodically, as if following a plan long rehearsed. By sunrise, the apartment that once held the laughter of 3 young children stood eerily still. The curtains were drawn, the front door locked, and the woman who had fought for years to protect herself and her sons was nowhere to be found. What happened inside that home in the early hours of August 10th would soon unravel into one of Lancaster's most haunting cases. A story of control, fear, and the desperate final act of a man who refused to let go. Before we go deeper into this investigation, subscribe if you love true crime documentaries, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's examine how a routine missing person report became an international manhunt, and how a single piece of doorbell camera footage would expose a carefully planned murder. When Shayla Elizabeth Cabrera left Peru, she carried the same hope shared by millions who begin a new life far from home, the hope of safety, stability, and opportunity. She wanted to give her children everything she never had. The move to the United States was not just a change of country. It was a leap of faith. She arrived with dreams, courage, and a mother's determination to build a future from the ground up. Understanding Shayla's journey requires understanding the broader context of Peruvian immigration to the United States. Throughout the early 21st century, thousands of Peruvian families relocated to California, particularly to areas like Lancaster, Palmdale, and the greater Los Angeles region, seeking economic opportunity and escaping various forms of instability in their home country. For many, the move represented not just economic advancement, but a chance to escape personal circumstances that had become untenable. Shayla's decision to emigrate was deeply personal. According to family members who later spoke with investigators, she had already experienced domestic violence in Peru. Court documents would later reveal that even before the family's move to California, Shayla had filed a formal complaint with Peruvian authorities accusing Josimar Cabrera of physical abuse. These reports, filed in Lima, detailed incidents of violence not only against Shayla herself, but also against their youngest child. Her mother, who remained in Lima throughout this period, would later tell investigators that Shayla had confided in her multiple times about the abuse, expressing fear, but also hoped that a fresh start in the United States might change their family dynamic. This hope, tragically common among domestic violence survivors, reflects a psychological pattern well documented by researchers. Many victims believe that environmental change, a new home, a new country, a new beginning, might somehow transform their abuser's behavior. The reality, as experts in domestic violence consistently observe, is that abusive patterns are deeply rooted in the abuser's need for control, not in external circumstances. At 33 years old, Shayla had already achieved much of what she once envisioned in Lancaster, California. She was known as a loving mother to 3 young boys, ages 9, 6, and 4, and a woman who worked tirelessly to provide for them. Friends and neighbors often spoke about her warmth and generosity. She was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, brought food to others when they were struggling, and still managed to smile through her own challenges. Those close to her described Shayla as a devoted mother and a loyal friend. She took pride in small details, preparing homemade Peruvian meals for her children, helping them with schoolwork, and decorating their modest apartment on Lancaster Boulevard with photos, drawings, and colorful touches that made it feel like home. Despite her limited means, she created a space filled with laughter and love. The apartment itself was unremarkable from the outside, part of a typical Southern California complex with stucco walls painted in neutral tones, shared laundry facilities, and a small courtyard where children occasionally played. Inside, however, Shayla had worked to create something distinctly theirs. Neighbors would later describe seeing her decorating for holidays, hanging Peruvian flags during independence celebrations, and playing traditional music on weekends. She maintained connections to her homeland while simultaneously trying to integrate into American life, enrolling her children in local schools, learning English through community programs, and building friendships with other immigrant families facing similar challenges. This balancing act, honoring one's heritage while adapting to a new culture, is a delicate dance familiar to millions of immigrant families, and Shayla approached it with both pride and pragmatism. But behind that sense of calm and normalcy, something darker was happening. Josimar Cabrera, her husband, seemed like a caring partner from the outside. He smiled in public, played the role of a father, and gave the impression of a stable family man. Yet, behind closed doors, life was very different. Even before moving to the United States, Shayla had already filed that report in Peru accusing him of abuse. According to her mother, who still lived in Lima, Josimar had hit her, mistreated her, and even struck their youngest child. Those who knew about it feared for her, but Shayla kept much of her pain hidden. Like many women in her situation, she hoped things might change once they started a new life abroad. Unfortunately, the violence didn't stop. It simply followed her to California. Understanding the dynamics of domestic violence is essential to understanding this case. Experts in intimate partner violence describe a pattern known as the cycle of abuse, which typically includes 3 phases: the tension-building phase, the acute battering incident, and the honeymoon phase. During the tension-building phase, minor incidents create friction, and the victim often walks on eggshells attempting to prevent an explosion. The acute battering incident is the violent outburst itself. The honeymoon phase follows, characterized by apologies, promises to change, and temporary calm. This cycle repeats, often escalating in severity over time. What makes this cycle particularly dangerous is that the honeymoon phase can create hope and emotional confusion in the victim, making it extraordinarily difficult to leave. Add to this the practical barriers: financial dependence, immigration status concerns, fear of losing custody of children, lack of local support networks, and the trap becomes nearly impossible to escape. For immigrant women like Shayla, these barriers are often magnified. Language difficulties, unfamiliarity with the American legal system, fear of deportation and isolation from extended family create additional layers of vulnerability. Friends began noticing changes in Shayla. Her cheerful energy started to fade, replaced by quiet exhaustion. She still smiled, still helped others, but her eyes seemed more distant. Elizabeth Russo, one of her closest friends, later told investigators that Shayla felt trapped. Josimar had threatened to take the children away if she left him, a fear that kept her bound to him for years. This threat is one of the most common and effective tools abusers use to maintain control. For mothers, the prospect of losing their children is often more terrifying than the violence itself. Abusers understand this vulnerability and exploit it ruthlessly. Josimar's threats were not idle. He understood the legal complexities of their situation. As an immigrant family, the question of custody could involve not just California family courts, but potentially international jurisdiction issues, particularly if he threatened to take the children back to Peru. For Shayla, who had already fled Peru once to escape his violence, the thought of him taking her sons back to a country where she had limited legal recourse must have been unbearable. Even in the midst of that fear, Shayla's heart remained kind. She helped her neighbors with small tasks, shared stories about her childhood in Peru, and spoke about the dreams she had for her sons. She wanted them to grow up in peace, surrounded by love, to study, to travel, to live freely. It was that vision that kept her going even as the walls of her marriage closed in around her. By the summer of 2025, Shayla had made up her mind. The years of abuse had worn her down, and she could no longer live in fear. She began to plan her escape carefully, saving money, talking quietly with friends she trusted, and preparing to file for divorce. She also planned to report Josimar to the authorities in Lancaster, determined to protect her boys once and for all. The decision to leave an abusive relationship is often the most dangerous moment in a victim's life. Statistics consistently show that women are at the highest risk of being killed by their abusive partners when they attempt to leave or shortly after separation. Abusers perceive the loss of control as an existential threat to their identity and power. For men like Josimar, whose entire relationship dynamic was built on dominance and control, the prospect of Shayla asserting independence represented not just a personal rejection, but a fundamental challenge to his sense of self. Domestic violence experts refer to this as separation violence, and it accounts for a significant percentage of intimate partner homicides. Shayla, whether consciously or not, understood this danger. That's why she planned carefully, confiding only in those she trusted most, and preparing to involve law enforcement before making her final move. On August 9th, she called her parents in Peru and told them everything. She said she was ready to leave and was going to the police. Her voice carried both fear and hope. Fear of what might happen if he found out, and hope that she could finally start over. Her mother remembered that call vividly. It would be the last time she ever heard her daughter's voice. That conversation, later reconstructed by investigators through phone records and family testimony, provides a crucial timestamp in the case. Shayla made that call in the late afternoon California time, early evening in Lima. She spoke with both her mother and father, explaining her plan in detail. She told them she had gathered important documents, birth certificates for the children, her own identification papers, bank statements. She had opened a separate bank account without Josimar's knowledge. She had researched shelters and legal aid services for domestic violence victims. She had even consulted quietly with a lawyer about divorce proceedings and custody arrangements. Everything was in place. She planned to go to the Lancaster Sheriff's Station the following day, August 10th, to file both a domestic violence restraining order and a formal police report. She would then take the children and go to a safe location arranged through a local advocacy organization. Her parents encouraged her, told her they loved her, and promised to support her however they could. When the call ended, Shayla's mother felt both relief and unease. Relief that her daughter was finally taking action, but a nagging fear about what Josimar might do if he discovered her plans. Inside their apartment, the tension was growing. Josimar knew what was coming. To him, the idea of losing control was unbearable. Friends later said that he seemed distant and angry in the days before Shayla disappeared. What Shayla didn't know was that he had already made up his mind. If he couldn't keep her under his control, he would make sure no one else could. The psychological profile of men who kill their intimate partners reveals common patterns. Many are deeply possessive, viewing their partners not as independent individuals, but as extensions of themselves or as property. The idea that the partner might exist happily without them is intolerable. Research into intimate partner homicide shows that perpetrators often exhibit a combination of traits, including extreme jealousy, an obsessive need for control, a history of escalating violence, threats of harm to self or others, and a belief that they are entitled to their partner's obedience. Many also display a striking ability to compartmentalize, presenting a normal or even charming facade to the outside world while maintaining a reign of terror at home. Josimar fit this profile. Neighbors and acquaintances who spoke to investigators after Shayla's disappearance expressed shock, describing him as quiet, polite, and seemingly devoted to his children. What they didn't see was the private reality Shayla endured daily. That night, everything changed. August 9th, 2025, would be the last day anyone saw Shayla Cabrera alive. In the early hours of August 10th, while her children slept nearby, something horrific unfolded inside their Lancaster apartment. The details remain partially sealed in court documents, but what investigators later pieced together paints a chilling picture of deliberate violence. Prosecutors alleged that Josimar Cabrera murdered his wife inside the home they shared with their 3 sons. The case filed by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office included a special circumstances allegation. A knife was used in the attack. This was not a sudden argument or a moment of rage. It was cold. It was calculated. It was final. The use of a knife in this case is particularly significant from both a legal and psychological standpoint. California law treats the use of a deadly weapon during a murder as a special circumstance that can enhance sentencing. From a psychological perspective, the use of a knife in intimate partner homicide is often associated with extreme rage and a desire for complete domination. Unlike firearms, which create distance between the killer and victim, knives require close physical proximity and sustained effort. Forensic psychologists note that such attacks often reflect not just an intent to kill, but an intent to utterly destroy. The act is intensely personal, violent, and prolonged. For investigators, the discovery that a knife was used immediately suggested this was not an impulsive crime of passion, but rather an attack fueled by deep-seated rage and a determination to eliminate Shayla permanently from his life. By morning, the small apartment that had once been full of laughter had fallen silent. The children awoke in a world that would never be the same, and a community that had admired Shayla for her strength and kindness would soon be mourning the woman who had spent her final days fighting for freedom. Inside the small apartment on Lancaster Boulevard, 3 young boys slept peacefully in their beds, unaware that the world around them was collapsing. They didn't hear the struggle. They didn't see the violence. In another room, their father, the man who had once promised to protect them, was taking their mother's life. The walls of that apartment, once filled with laughter and bedtime stories, now held only silence and the echo of unthinkable cruelty. The question of whether the children heard or witnessed anything remains one of the most painful aspects of this case. Investigators interviewed the boys carefully, using trained child forensic specialists after they were recovered from Peru. The details of those interviews remain sealed to protect the children's privacy and well-being. What is known is that the boys were asleep in their shared bedroom when the attack occurred. Whether they were awakened by sounds, whether they emerged afterward and saw something traumatic, or whether Josimar somehow shielded them from the immediate aftermath, remains unclear. What is certain is that by morning their mother was gone, and their father was preparing to dispose of her body while keeping them unaware of the nightmare that had just unfolded. When the act was over, Josimar Cabrera faced what came next. The man who had spent years controlling his wife through fear now turned to controlling what would happen to her body. Investigators later said that what followed was not chaos, but a disturbing display of order. He wrapped Shayla's body in a large piece of fabric, folding it tightly and securing it to conceal any trace of what he had done. That same material would later become a key piece of evidence, matching exactly what was seen in the surveillance footage that broke the case open. The fabric was later identified as a large bedsheet or blanket, similar to materials commonly found in the apartment. Forensic analysis would eventually confirm that fibers from this fabric matched materials recovered from the apartment and from Josimar's vehicle. The way he wrapped the body demonstrated a level of planning and composure that disturbed investigators. This was not someone panicking in the aftermath of a sudden violent act. This was someone executing a premeditated plan with methodical precision. He moved deliberately, not like someone panicking after a sudden act of violence, but like a man following a plan. Neighbors would later recall hearing faint noises during the early morning hours, doors closing, something being dragged, then the sound of a car starting. In the quiet of that neighborhood, the smallest sound carried through the still air. One neighbor, who worked a night shift and typically returned home around 2:30 in the morning, reported seeing something unusual that night. Around 2:40 a.m., she noticed the parking lot was unusually active. Most residents were asleep by that hour, but one man was awake. Josimar cleaning the trunk of his silver sedan. She paused, confused. At that hour, there was no reason for anyone to be outside doing that. She later told investigators she found it odd, but didn't think much of it at the time. People do strange things at odd hours sometimes. What she didn't realize was that she was witnessing the beginning of a cover-up. Investigators would later confirm that she had unknowingly seen a man preparing to hide the body of his wife. The sedan, a silver 4-door vehicle registered to Josimar, would become a crucial piece of evidence. Forensic technicians would later process the trunk, finding trace amounts of blood and biological material, despite Josimar's attempts to clean it. That late-night cleaning session, witnessed by the returning neighbor, represented an attempt to remove immediate evidence before the more difficult task of disposing of the body. The defining moment came hours later, when detectives recovered footage from a nearby Ring doorbell camera. In the grainy black and white video, time-stamped 4 a.m., a figure could be seen dragging a large, heavy object wrapped in fabric across the pavement. The effort in his movements, the way he struggled to lift it, it was unmistakable. That object was Shayla Cabrera. The footage would later become the centerpiece of the homicide investigation, cold, irrefutable proof of the final betrayal. The Ring camera, installed by a neighbor for routine home security purposes, captured approximately 45 seconds of footage. The video quality, while grainy due to the low light conditions, was sufficient to show a male figure matching Josimar's build and height, dragging something wrapped in light-colored fabric from the direction of the Cabrera apartment toward the parking area. The timestamp was critical. 4 a.m. falls within the window when most people are in their deepest sleep, making it an ideal time for someone attempting to move something undetected. The figure in the video can be seen pausing multiple times, adjusting his grip and struggling with the weight. At one point, he appears to rest, setting the bundle down briefly before continuing. The body language, the mechanics of the movement, and the sheer weight being dragged all pointed to one conclusion. This was not furniture, not trash, not any innocent object. This was a human body. Moments later, the man lifted the bundle and forced it into the trunk of the car. He closed the lid, walked around to the driver's side and drove away into the night. His route would take him out of Lancaster and into the dark, winding roads leading toward the Angeles National Forest, a vast stretch of wilderness that covers more than 700,000 acres of rugged canyons and cliffs. During the day, it is a place of quiet beauty, but under the cover of darkness, it has often been used as a dumping ground for violent crimes. The isolation, the steep drop-offs, the endless terrain, it was the perfect place to make someone disappear. The Angeles National Forest, established in 1908, spans a massive area of the San Gabriel Mountains north of Los Angeles. It includes everything from popular hiking trails and campgrounds to remote, nearly inaccessible wilderness. Over the years, law enforcement has unfortunately recovered numerous bodies from this vast area. The combination of steep terrain, dense vegetation, and countless hidden ravines makes it an attractive location for those seeking to conceal evidence of violent crimes. Investigators familiar with the area know that once something is disposed of in the deeper parts of the forest, particularly down an embankment or ravine, it can remain undiscovered for months or even years. Weather, wildlife, and the natural decomposition process all contribute to the erasure of evidence. Josimar, whether through his own research or through knowledge gained from news coverage of previous cases, understood these realities. Josimar drove deep into the forest, navigating through sharp turns and narrow roads until he found a spot hidden from view. There in the cold early morning air, he opened the trunk and pulled out the bundle. The forest was silent. No headlights passed. No one saw what he did next. He dragged Shayla's body to the edge of a steep embankment and pushed it over. Her body tumbled down among the rocks and brush, coming to rest in the darkness below. The woman who had once shared his home, his meals, his life, the mother of his 3 children, was abandoned like a discarded object. The location where Shayla's body was eventually found was approximately 30 miles northeast of Lancaster, accessed via Angeles Forest Highway, and then several miles along secondary forest roads. The specific embankment was steep, dropping approximately 50 feet from the road level down to a rocky ravine thick with chaparral and manzanita bushes. During the day, the area is remote but not entirely inaccessible. However, at 4:30 or 5 a.m., in complete darkness, it would have required either prior knowledge of the location or a deliberate search for an appropriate disposal site. Investigators later speculated, based on the efficiency with which Josimar navigated to this spot, that he may have scouted it in advance, possibly during the days when he sensed Shayla was planning to leave. This level of premeditation would further support the prosecution's theory that this was a calculated murder, not a crime of passion. When it was done, Josimar got back in the car and drove home. Inside the apartment, The boys were still asleep, unaware that their mother would never return. By morning, he began to prepare his next act, the lies. 2 days later, on August 12, 2025, Shayla's friends grew desperate. They had not heard from her since August 9th. No calls, no messages, no social media activity, nothing. That silence was unlike her. She was always in touch, especially when it came to her children. She would never disappear without telling someone. The alarm bells started ringing first among Shayla's closest circle of friends, particularly Elizabeth Russo and several other women she had met through the Peruvian community in Lancaster. These women knew Shayla's routines intimately. She posted regularly on social media, sharing photos of her children, recipes, and small moments of daily life. She texted frequently in their group chat, coordinating playdates and sharing concerns. When August 10th passed with no word, they initially assumed she might be dealing with a family emergency. But by August 11th, concern turned to worry. By August 12th, when still no one had heard anything, and Josimar was giving evasive non-answers when contacted, they knew something was terribly wrong. Worried, her friends went to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Lancaster station to file a missing person report. Deputies were sent to the Cabrera apartment. Josimar answered the door. He appeared calm, polite, even helpful at first. But as detectives began asking questions, his stories began to shift. At first, he claimed that Shayla had been detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It was a calculated lie, one that preyed on the fear and confusion surrounding immigration issues. He likely believed it would discourage immediate investigation, as such cases often involve complex bureaucracy and delayed communication. When detectives asked for details, which facility, when did this happen, what were the circumstances, he changed his story. Now he said Shayla had left him for another man. Later, in a third version, he claimed she had been involved in an accident but offered no specifics, no witnesses, no report, no location. Each story contradicted the last. Every new explanation fell apart under even the simplest questioning. The evolution of Josimar's alibis is a textbook example of deceptive behavior patterns that law enforcement officers are trained to recognize. When someone is telling the truth about a loved one's disappearance, their story remains consistent across multiple tellings. Minor details might vary as memory reconstructs events, but the core narrative stays stable. In contrast, when someone is fabricating an explanation, the story tends to shift significantly each time it's challenged. Josimar's progression from ICE detention to running away with another man to being in an accident demonstrated not just dishonesty, but increasing desperation. Each lie was crafted to explain Shayla's absence while deflecting investigation away from him. The ICE detention story was particularly calculated because it played on the complex reality of immigration enforcement. Many immigrant families live in fear of ICE, and detention cases can indeed be difficult to verify immediately. By claiming this, Josimar hoped to buy time, days or perhaps weeks, during which he could further distance himself from the crime or potentially flee the country. The infidelity story was a classic abuser's narrative, attempting to paint the victim as unfaithful and therefore culpable in her own disappearance. The accident story was perhaps his weakest effort, offered when the previous two narratives had been disproven, a last-ditch attempt to provide any explanation other than the truth. Detectives soon realized they weren't speaking to a worried husband. They were speaking to a man trying to hide what he had done. As investigators began to piece things together, friends of Shayla Cabrera came forward with critical information. They spoke about the years of domestic violence, the countless times she had asked for help, and the fear she lived with daily. They told detectives about her plan to leave her husband and the threats he had made to take the children if she ever tried. The image of a devoted family man that Josimar projected was crumbling. These witness statements transformed the investigation. One friend provided copies of text messages Shayla had sent her describing incidents of abuse. Another brought screenshots of social media posts that, while seemingly innocuous to outsiders, contained coded messages that friends understood as cries for help. Elizabeth Russo provided perhaps the most damning testimony. She recounted a conversation from just days before Shayla's disappearance in which Shayla explicitly stated she feared Josimar might hurt her if he discovered her plan to leave. She had asked Elizabeth, "If something happens to me, please make sure my boys are safe." At the time, Elizabeth had tried to reassure her, encouraging her to contact police immediately. Now those words hung in the air with tragic prescience. With his story shifting and the friends' testimonies revealing a history of abuse, investigators understood that this was no longer a simple missing person case. This was a murder investigation in disguise. Detectives began going through every possible clue. They checked phone records, traffic cameras, and security systems in the area around the Lancaster apartment complex. Phone records revealed that Shayla's cell phone had gone silent after approximately 11 p.m. on August 9th. Her last outgoing call was to her mother in Peru at 7:30 that evening. After that, nothing. No texts sent, no social media activity, no calls placed or received. Her phone's location data showed it remained at the apartment until approximately 4:15 a.m. on August 10th, then moved along a route consistent with travel toward the Angeles National Forest, then went completely offline around 5 a.m. Investigators theorized that Josimar likely powered off or destroyed her phone once he reached the disposal site. Traffic cameras captured Josimar's silver sedan, leaving Lancaster on Route 138, then turning onto Angeles Forest Highway. The timestamp matched the window established by the Ring camera footage and phone location data. Then, on August 13th, just 3 days after Shayla vanished, came the turning point. A neighbor's Ring doorbell camera had captured footage from the early morning hours of August 10th. The video showed Josimar dragging a large object wrapped in fabric across the ground and out of the complex. He struggled with the weight of it before loading it into the trunk of his car. That short clip changed everything. What had begun as a missing person report instantly became a homicide investigation. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Homicide Bureau took charge immediately. Detectives coordinated with specialized search and rescue teams from Crescenta Valley, Altadena, and Montrose. Their task was enormous: to search through over 700,000 acres of the Angeles National Forest, a vast landscape of steep canyons, cliffs, and dense brush. Finding a body there was like looking for a single grain of sand in a desert. But they knew they had to try. The search operation that followed represented a massive coordinated effort involving multiple agencies and volunteer organizations. Search and rescue teams in Southern California are typically composed of highly trained volunteers who specialize in wilderness rescue, technical rope operations, and body recovery in difficult terrain. The teams that responded to this case brought specialized equipment, including GPS mapping tools, cadaver dogs, drones equipped with thermal imaging cameras, and technical climbing gear for accessing steep embankments. The challenge they faced was daunting. Based on the vehicle tracking data and timestamp analysis, investigators could narrow the search area to approximately a 20-mile stretch of forest roads and several hundred adjacent acres of wilderness. Even with this narrowed focus, the terrain was brutal. Summer temperatures in the San Gabriel Mountains can exceed 90 degrees during the day, making extended search operations physically exhausting. The vegetation is thick with thorny chaparral that tears at clothing and skin. Ravines plunge hundreds of feet, requiring careful technical descent. And always, there is the risk of encountering wildlife, including rattlesnakes, mountain lions, and aggressive bees. Meanwhile, new information made the case even more urgent. Josimar and the couple's 3 young children were now missing as well. Working with both the Mexican and Peruvian consulates, U.S. authorities issued international alerts, fearing he had already fled the country. Leads suggested that he was making his way towards South America. This development transformed the investigation from a local homicide case into an international fugitive pursuit. The FBI became involved, coordinating with Interpol and law enforcement agencies in Mexico and Peru. Border alerts were issued at all points of entry and exit. The challenge investigators faced was timing. If Josimar had left immediately after disposing of Shayla's body, he would have had nearly a 3-day head start by the time the homicide investigation officially began. Given the porous nature of the southern U.S. border and the reality that thousands of people cross legally and illegally every day, there was a very real possibility he had already left the United States. Then, on the morning of August 16th, just after 10 a.m., the radio call every investigator both hopes for and dreads came in. Members of the Montrose Mountains Search and Rescue Team had spotted something down a steep embankment in a remote part of the Angeles National Forest, a bundle of fabric that looked eerily familiar. When homicide detectives arrived, they climbed down to the area. Among the rocks and brush, wrapped in the same kind of material seen in the video, they found the body of 33-year-old Shayla Cabrera. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The discovery confirmed what many had feared. The object seen on the surveillance footage was indeed her body. The recovery operation was difficult and somber. The embankment was steep enough that rope systems had to be established to safely bring the body back up to the road level. Forensic photographers documented everything before the body was moved. The fabric wrapping was carefully preserved as evidence. Preliminary examination at the scene confirmed visible trauma consistent with a knife attack, though full autopsy results would take additional days. The location where Shayla was found was approximately 2.3 miles from the nearest paved road, accessible only by a rough fire road that required a four-wheel drive vehicle or a long hike. The fact that the searchers found her at all was a testament to their skill and persistence. Had the body been pushed just a few feet further, it might have tumbled deeper into an area so inaccessible that it could have remained undiscovered for years. The news spread quickly through Lancaster's Peruvian community. Candlelight vigils began forming almost immediately. People brought flowers, photos, and handwritten notes, remembering the woman who had come to the United States, chasing a dream of safety and a better life for her children. Instead, she had met a violent end at the hands of the man she trusted most. That same day, investigators received word from Peru. The 3 Cabrera children had been located safe and taken into protective custody. They were alive, but their mother was gone, and their father was now an international fugitive. That evening, dozens of people gathered outside Lancaster City Hall. Some held candles, others held signs reading, "Justice for Shayla and not one more." The community stood together in grief, their faces lit by candlelight as they mourned the loss of a mother, a friend, and a neighbor who had given so much of herself to others. The vigil was organized by a local domestic violence advocacy group and members of the Peruvian immigrant community. Speakers included friends who shared memories of Shayla, representatives from domestic violence organizations who spoke about the epidemic of intimate partner violence, and local politicians who pledged to increase funding for victim services. The event was covered extensively by local news media, bringing broader attention to Shayla's story and to the systemic issues that allow domestic violence to escalate to murder. Meanwhile, across the continent, Josimar Cabrera was already thousands of miles away, hiding in Peru, moving through cities and trying to stay one step ahead of the law. But investigators were closing in. The same technology, persistence, and cooperation that had revealed his crime would soon bring him face to face with justice. After fleeing the United States, Josimar crossed international borders in a desperate attempt to escape capture. He was detained not once but twice, first in Mexico and later in Peru, both times traveling by land, trying to stay ahead of the authorities. Despite being questioned, he was released each time. At that point, US prosecutors had not yet filed formal charges, meaning foreign governments had no legal reason to hold him. It was a frustrating delay for investigators who already knew he was responsible for Shayla's murder. The international aspect of this case highlights the complex challenges of pursuing fugitives across borders. When Josimar fled the United States, he likely crossed into Mexico by land, possibly through the Tijuana-San Diego border crossing or further east through Arizona. Thousands of people cross the US-Mexico border daily in both directions, and while there are extensive databases and watch lists, the system is not foolproof, especially if someone crosses before an arrest warrant is officially issued. Mexican authorities stopped and questioned Josimar at some point during his transit through the country, but without formal charges filed by US prosecutors and without an extradition warrant, they had no legal basis to detain him beyond routine questioning. This represents a gap in the international law enforcement system. Even when one country's police strongly suspect someone of a crime, Other countries cannot act until formal legal processes are completed. Josimar exploited this gap, moving quickly through Mexico before U.S. authorities could finalize the necessary paperwork. When Josimar finally arrived at the Jorge Chávez International Airport in Lima, Peru, local authorities were waiting. He was stopped, questioned, and the 3 young children who had traveled with him were taken into protective custody. Still, without a formal extradition order or filed U.S. charges, Peruvian police had no authority to detain him. The man suspected of killing his wife was free to walk away while his children were handed over to child welfare officials. The scene at the airport, later described by Peruvian authorities, was tense. Immigration officers had been alerted by Interpol that Josimar was a person of interest in a homicide investigation, but person of interest is not the same as fugitive with an active warrant. They questioned him for several hours, asking about his travel plans, his reasons for returning to Peru, and the circumstances of his wife's absence. Josimar reportedly told officials that he and Shayla had separated and he was bringing the children to Peru to stay with family while they sorted out their divorce. It was a plausible enough story, and without evidence to contradict it or legal authority to hold him, they had to release him. The children, however, were taken into protective custody based on concerns raised by U.S. authorities through diplomatic channels. Peruvian child welfare officials housed the boys temporarily in a facility while social workers assessed their well-being and U.S. authorities worked to arrange their return. Over the next few days, the case gained attention in both the United States and Peru. Shayla's story spread across social media and news outlets, with many questioning how her killer could walk free while her family grieved. The Peruvian Foreign Ministry, working in coordination with U.S. consular officials, quickly stepped in to ensure the children's safety. Within days, the 3 boys were flown out of Lima, connecting through Mexico City and repatriated to Los Angeles, where they were reunited with their maternal grandmother, Helga Rosillo. For Helga, it was a heartbreaking reunion. Her grandsons were safe, but her daughter was gone forever. The logistics of returning the children involved coordination between multiple government agencies in 3 countries. U.S. consular officials in Lima worked with Peruvian child welfare authorities to verify the boys' identities, ensure they had proper travel documents, and arrange safe escort for their journey. Because the boys were U.S. citizens born in California, they had the legal right to return to the United States, and U.S. authorities were eager to get them out of Peru before Josimar could attempt to interfere. The reunion at Los Angeles International Airport was emotional. Helga, who had flown from Lima to Los Angeles days earlier to assist with the investigation and begin planning her daughter's funeral, embraced her grandsons with tears of both joy and grief. The boys, traumatized and confused, clung to their grandmother, the one stable presence in a world that had suddenly turned incomprehensible. Meanwhile, on the other side of the continent, prosecutors in Los Angeles County were moving at full speed. Detectives from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Homicide Bureau compiled hundreds of pages of evidence: the surveillance video, witness statements, forensic findings from the apartment, and Shayla's history of domestic violence reports. On August 21st, that case file was presented to the District Attorney's Office for formal review. The District Attorney's Office reviewed the evidence and determined they had a strong case for filing murder charges. The surveillance footage was powerful evidence. Combined with witness testimony about Josimar's shifting alibis, the domestic violence history, and forensic evidence from the apartment and vehicle, they believed they could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Josimar had murdered Shayla. Later that day, the district attorney's team announced they were charging Josimar with 1 count of murder, including a special allegation that he had used a knife as a deadly weapon. This special allegation was significant because under California law, use of a deadly weapon during the commission of certain felonies can substantially increase sentencing exposure. In this case, if convicted on all charges, Josimar would face 26 years to life in prison. The following morning, an extradition arrest warrant was issued and Interpol was officially notified. A red notice, essentially an international wanted alert, was distributed across the world, identifying Josimar as a fugitive accused of homicide. Interpol red notices are one of the most powerful tools in international law enforcement. They are issued for individuals wanted for prosecution or to serve a sentence, and they alert police worldwide that a particular person is wanted by authorities in a specific country. Member countries are requested to locate and provisionally arrest the individual pending extradition. While a red notice is not technically an international arrest warrant, each country makes its own decision about whether to arrest based on their domestic laws. In practice, most countries honor red notices, especially for serious crimes like murder. The issuance of the red notice for Josimar meant that any interaction he had with law enforcement anywhere in the world would flag in the system, and he could be arrested on sight. The case became a top priority for both the U.S. Department of Justice and Peruvian National Police. Reports from Peru described an intense manhunt, agents tracking movements along the Pan American Highway, checking hotels and transportation hubs, and coordinating closely with Interpol offices in Mexico and the United States. For nearly 2 weeks, Josimar remained on the run, but with the red notice active, every move he made became riskier. His face was circulating across international databases, border alerts, and media coverage in both countries. Investigators believe the growing pressure left him with few options. Family members in Peru who were contacted by police likely informed him that authorities were closing in. His financial resources were limited. He couldn't work legally, couldn't rent an apartment under his own name, couldn't even travel freely without risk of recognition. The psychological pressure of living as a fugitive, combined with the practical impossibility of building a new life while wanted for murder, created an untenable situation. Finally, on August 27, 2025, Josimar surrendered himself to authorities. He walked into Interpol headquarters in Lima and turned himself in. Peruvian National Police released footage showing the moment of his arrest. Josimar, standing handcuffed, dressed in a black shirt marked with the Interpol insignia, flanked by officers on each side. His expression was blank, his head lowered as cameras flashed and officers led him away. According to Peruvian officials, he will remain in custody in Lima while the extradition process moves forward. The surrender, while appearing to be a voluntary act, was likely the result of intense pressure. Interpol sources later suggested that family members in Peru had convinced him that surrender was his only realistic option, and that surrendering voluntarily might be viewed more favorably by courts than being captured while actively fleeing. Whether this calculation will have any practical benefit remains to be seen. California prosecutors have made clear they will pursue the maximum sentence allowed by law. These procedures often take several months, involving diplomatic coordination and court hearings to ensure compliance with international law. Once approved, he will be transported back to California, where he will face trial for the murder of Sheila Cabrera. The extradition process from Peru to the United States involves several steps. First, U.S. authorities must formally request extradition through diplomatic channels, providing evidence that a crime was committed, that the accused individual is the person wanted, and that the crime is covered under the extradition treaty between the two countries. Peru and the United States have had an extradition treaty since 1901, updated several times, most recently in 2001. Murder is unequivocally covered under this treaty. Once the formal request is submitted, Peruvian courts must review it to ensure it meets legal standards and that extraditing Josimar would not violate Peruvian law or constitutional protections. This judicial review typically takes between 3 to 6 months, though it can be expedited in clear-cut cases. During this time, Josimar can contest the extradition, hire legal representation, and make arguments why he should not be sent back to the United States. However, given the strength of the evidence and the clarity of the charges, legal experts believe his extradition is virtually certain. Once Peruvian courts approve the extradition, he will be handed over to U.S. Marshals who will transport him back to Los Angeles County, where he will be formally arraigned in Superior Court. If convicted, Josimar Cabrera faces a maximum sentence of 26 years to life in prison. For Sheila's family, the long wait for justice is far from over. But after months of fear, searching, and heartbreak, there is finally hope that the man who destroyed her life will be held accountable. The sentencing range reflects California's approach to murder with special circumstances. A conviction on first-degree murder alone carries a sentence of 25 years to life. The deadly weapon enhancement adds 1 additional year, bringing the total to 26 years to life. This means that if convicted, Josimar will not be eligible for parole consideration until he has served at minimum 26 years in state prison. Given his age at the time of the crime, early to mid-30s, he would be well into his 60s before any possibility of release. For many observers, this seems like inadequate justice for taking a young mother's life and leaving 3 boys without their mother. But within the constraints of California law and the specific charges filed, it represents the maximum punishment available. Justice for Shayla Elizabeth Cabrera has begun its long journey home. A journey fueled by the love of a mother who came to America seeking peace and by a community that refuses to let her story be forgotten. This case resonates far beyond Lancaster, far beyond the Peruvian immigrant community, far beyond even the issue of domestic violence. It speaks to fundamental questions about control, power, vulnerability, and the failures of systems designed to protect the most vulnerable among us. Shayla had done everything right. She had reported abuse in Peru. She had built a support network in California. She had planned her escape carefully. She had contacted friends and family. She was 1 day away from going to the police, and yet she died anyway. This tragic reality forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the limitations of domestic violence intervention, the challenges facing immigrant women, and the lethal determination of abusers who refuse to relinquish control. In the aftermath of Shayla's murder, domestic violence advocates in Los Angeles County called for increased funding for victim services, expanded legal protections for immigrant victims, and better coordination between immigration enforcement and domestic violence services. The fear that ICE involvement creates in immigrant communities, the same fear Josimar exploited when he falsely claimed Shayla had been detained, makes many victims reluctant to seek help from police or courts. Advocates argue that without clear protections, guaranteeing that domestic violence victims will not face immigration consequences for reporting abuse, countless women remain trapped in dangerous situations. Some jurisdictions have implemented U-visa protocols that provide temporary legal status to crime victims who cooperate with law enforcement, but awareness of these programs remains limited, and the application process can be lengthy and complex. The Cabrera case also highlights the critical role of technology in modern investigations. Without the Ring doorbell camera, investigators might never have recovered Shayla's body. The time-stamped footage not only confirmed that Josimar had disposed of something large and heavy during the crucial time frame, but also provided the visual evidence necessary to secure search warrants, justify the massive search operation, and ultimately support murder charges. This case has been cited in law enforcement training as an example of how residential security cameras have become indispensable investigative tools. Departments now routinely canvass neighborhoods after serious crimes, requesting footage from Ring, Nest, and other camera systems. The technology that homeowners install to protect their property increasingly serves a broader public safety function, capturing evidence of crimes that would otherwise go undetected. For the 3 Cabrera boys, now being raised by their grandmother in a city far from the only home they'd known, the long-term impact of this tragedy is incalculable. They have lost their mother to violence and their father to prison. They have been uprooted from their home, separated from friends, and thrust into a fundamentally altered reality. Child psychologists who specialize in trauma note that children who witness or are affected by intimate partner violence face elevated risks of mental health challenges including depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and attachment difficulties. The fact that these boys were so young when this occurred, ages 4, 6, and 9, means they will need ongoing therapeutic support for years, possibly decades, to process what happened. Their grandmother, herself grieving the loss of her daughter, must now serve as their primary caregiver while also helping them navigate this trauma. Community organizations in Los Angeles have rallied to support the family, providing counseling services, financial assistance, and practical support. But no amount of community support can replace what these boys have lost. Shayla's story has become part of a growing national conversation about intimate partner violence and femicide. Every year in the United States, approximately 1,800 women are murdered by current or former intimate partners, representing a significant portion of all female homicide victims. The majority of these murders follow a pattern similar to Shayla's case: escalating violence, attempts by the victim to leave, and a final lethal attack by a partner determined to maintain control. Domestic violence organizations emphasize that leaving an abusive relationship is the most dangerous time for victims. This is when abusers perceive that their control is slipping away, triggering what experts call annihilation reactions. For some abusers, the idea that their partner might exist happily without them is literally unbearable. If they cannot possess the victim, they will destroy her. This dynamic, rooted in extreme possessiveness, entitlement, and a fundamental denial of the victim's autonomous humanity, underlies a significant percentage of intimate partner homicides. In Lancaster and throughout the Peruvian community in Southern California, Shayla's name has become synonymous with the need for change. Annual vigils are now held on August 10th, the date of her death, to remember her and all victims of domestic violence. Community organizations have established the Shayla Cabrera Fund, which provides financial assistance to women seeking to leave abusive relationships, covering costs like security deposits for new apartments, legal fees for restraining orders, and emergency relocation expenses. Local schools where Shayla's children attended have implemented programs to educate students about healthy relationships and to provide resources for families experiencing domestic violence. These initiatives, born from tragedy, represent the community's determination that Shayla's death will not be meaningless, that her story will save others. The legal proceedings against Josimar Cabrera continue slowly through the international system. Once extradited, he will face arraignment in Los Angeles County Superior Court, where he will enter a plea. If he pleads not guilty, as is expected, the case will proceed to trial. Given the strength of the evidence, particularly the video footage, many legal observers believe he may eventually accept a plea agreement to avoid the risk of trial. However, prosecutors have indicated they are prepared to take the case to trial if necessary and are confident in their ability to secure a conviction. For Shayla's mother Helga and the extended family in Peru and California, the legal process represents a form of closure. Though no verdict can bring Shayla back, they have expressed a desire to see justice served, not out of vengeance but out of a fundamental belief that Josimar must be held accountable for what he did, and that his punishment must send a message that domestic violence will not be tolerated, that women's lives matter, and that murderers will be found and punished regardless of how far they run. As this case moves toward resolution, it forces us to reflect on larger societal questions. How do we create systems that effectively protect victims of domestic violence? How do we address the unique vulnerabilities facing immigrant women? How do we change cultural attitudes that treat intimate partner violence as a private family matter rather than a serious crime? How do we interrupt the cycle of abuse before it escalates to murder? These are not simple questions with easy answers. They require sustained commitment from law enforcement, social services, healthcare providers, educators, policymakers, and communities themselves. They require adequate funding for victim services, for shelters, for legal assistance, for counseling. They require training for professionals who interact with potential victims, doctors, teachers, clergy, social workers, to recognize warning signs and know how to respond effectively. They require cultural change that challenges attitudes minimizing or excusing abuse, that teaches young people what healthy relationships look like, and that empowers bystanders to intervene when they see concerning behavior. Shayla Elizabeth Cabrera came to the United States with dreams of safety and opportunity. She worked hard, loved her children deeply, and gave generously to her community. She tried to escape violence, made plans, reached out for help, and prepared to take legal action. She did everything our system tells domestic violence victims to do, and yet the system failed her. She died just hours before she planned to seek police protection. Her story is not unique. Thousands of women face similar circumstances every year. What makes Shayla's case different is that her story has been told, her life has been remembered, and her community has committed to fighting to prevent similar tragedies. In that commitment lies a small measure of hope. Shayla's voice was silenced, but the voices raised in her name continue to demand change, justice, and recognition that every woman's life matters, that every mother deserves safety, and that domestic violence is not a private matter, but a public crisis demanding urgent collective action. Her legacy is not the violence that ended her life, but the determination of those who loved her to ensure that her death was not in vain. That determination, that love, that refusal to accept that such tragedies are inevitable, that is how we honor Shayla Elizabeth Cabrera and all those whose lives have been stolen by intimate partner violence. Their stories must be told, their names must be remembered, and the work to protect others must continue, one case at a time, one policy at a time, one conversation at a time, until the day when no woman lives in fear of the person who claims to love her.